Hey everybody, welcome back finally to my Star Wars show. I am here with my new co-host for the show, the only man for the job, Andrew Orozco, and we are here to talk all about Star Wars. And now this is episode 2 of my Star Wars show. Technically it's episode 3 because we just talked for 45 minutes, but I forgot to hit record. But in actuality, we're going to call this the new episode 1 because my Star Wars show is pivoting away from what it was in my singular video about The Force Unleashed. And what it is now is much like Untitled Marvel Project, a conversational show, this time set in the context of the Star Wars universe. So Andrew and I are going to be coming to you bi-weekly with a brand new Star Wars topic. And sometimes they will be topical. We will do some coverage for the premiere and then the finale of the Book of Boba Fett. But our goal is to have these conversations be a little bit more amorphous, a little bit more free flowing, and about anything from any corner of the Star Wars galaxy and any part of its chronology. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about a very interesting period in Star Wars history that is the content that released post Revenge of the Sith and pre Force Awakens, in that weird period where we didn't quite know where Star Wars was going. But before we talk about that, we got to do a couple things. We got to give the plugs. We got to say, if you want to talk to us about Star Wars or suggest a new topic for us to cover, join our Discord link as usual. Top of the description while you're down there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a My Star Wars Show episode. But Andrew, before we get into the heart of the topic, first of all, sorry. Second of all, I think it was very valuable time nonetheless because we chatted a little bit. We got the rapport built up. So now I think that the audience is getting the current best Abram
Most
Andrew
natural.
dynamic.
Yeah, I agree.
So
Yeah, it's good for. There's a silver lining here. Yeah.
yes, there's a silver lining. But Andrew, this is a peculiar period in Star Wars' history because it's a period I grew up on, but it's a period where you, as an established Star Wars fan at that point, didn't really know what you're going to get into next, right? And in
Right.
this 45 minutes of recording that nobody will ever see, we talk about this period in a little bit of a high level way, but I think it's important to hear that we get a little bit more into the weeds, into the specifics. And so before we do that, I want to actually talk generally, which is exactly the opposite of what I just said, but I want you to do it because I kind of want you to set the scene a little bit because I was a young kid during this time. Phantom Menace comes out when I am -1 years old. I am becoming cognizant of Star Wars after Revenge of the Sith, so I'm like 4 or 5. So I was not in the Star Wars culture at that point. I didn't know what it was like to be a fan at that time, what the news, the rumors, the speculation was. So what was it like being there?
Well, for being on the ground floor at the time. Well, like I was mentioned earlier, obviously, we were talking about when Revenge of the Sith came out. I want to say that was like 2005. I
Yeah,
could
it
be
was.
wrong. That was 2005, May of
Yeah.
2005. I remember I was a freshman in high school. I had just seen it. I kind of talked about how at the time, at the end of the film, we have our heroes are defeated, like evil has prevailed. And although we know what's going to happen in the original trilogy that came out 20 something years before that, the film still kind of ends with like this kind of questionable future of like not just of like how our heroes going to go from here, but like walking out of the theater like where's the franchise going to go from here, kind of like, because it kind of just wrapped up everything. Like the end of Revenge of the Sith is going to be 20 years before A New Hope, and we know what happens at the end of Return of the Jedi and all that. And being a fan at the time, I was like, okay, well that's over now. And it's like I don't think George Lucas has any solid concrete plans for a 7, 8, and 9. And turns out he actually had an inkling of an idea of 7, 8, and 9, but I think for either financial reasons or just because he wasn't sure what he wanted to go with, that didn't really materialize with him. I remember 2005. I think later that year, at the tail end of that year, I got Star Wars Battlefront 2, the original Battlefront 2, not the EA one. Well, I guess that was still EA, but you know what I mean, Pandemic Studios.
Yeah.
So we got the whole story of the 501st Vader's Fist. The campaign, sit across from starts at the Revenge of the Sith. I think ends at Return of the Jedi, right? I think that's where it ends in the campaign.
I think so, yeah. That flip is so cool when you become the stormtroopers and you're hunting down the Jedi. That campaign is really cool.
Yeah, yeah, we have that. I love the monologue. I mean, not the monologue, but just like the way the clones are in on it on the whole Order 66. Like when
Yeah.
Ayla Sakura does the thing where she like saves them or whatever, and like it's like, oh, and like they have like, oh, like none of us could look her in the eye, like knowing like what was gonna happen later on and stuff. So, but yeah, so Battlefront 2 came out at the tail end of 2005. And although Corridor came out in 2003, I want to
Yeah.
say, I didn't play till 2005. And Kodor, Battlefront 2, Revenge of the Sith, all those three things in that year for me was like, that's when I like completely dived in headfirst into Star Wars in the grand scheme of things, the expanded universe. That's when I started getting into the books. I got into, I mentioned before, I tried to get into the comics, but at the time, the comics weren't as accessible as they are now through like digital means and stuff. So it was hard to get into the comics. But the expanded universe, the stuff that's set like 30 years after Return of the Jedi, but also the stuff that takes place during the Clone Wars, the stuff that takes place in between 3 and 4, like all that stuff was in the books and in the games. And that's like when I wanted to like know more about what was going on. I wanted to be a part of like that whole mythos, the whole lore and the whole lore dump and all that stuff. So I got into the books about I don't know if you've read them, Abram, if you're ever gonna read them, but at that time, Legacy of the Force, which is a story arc that's like 9 books across, takes place about 35 years in the future after the Battle of Yavin. So because it's Star Wars Expanded Universe, they use ABY as like the time metric line for like after Battle of Yavin, and BBY before Battle of Yavin, all that stuff. That's like that's like one of the extra things I love about Star Wars is how they try to like catalog and legitimize everything in there. So 35 ABY, and it's about now like Han and Leia's children are grown up, like they're like in their 30 somethings, and like another Sith menace, of course, it's always a Sith. Another Sith menace presents itself, and then it kind of gets into some more of that stuff. Ends up tying into at the end of that ends up tying with one of my favorite stories, the more I think it's Mortis arc of Clone Wars. It actually kind of involved in that, really dope.
Yeah.
After all of that, I'm trying to remember like chronologically what came out like video game wise. I already mentioned, I think we got the second Lego Star Wars game, which was actually the original trilogy version. I believe so.
Yeah, I think I want to say that that might have been before Battlefront though. I think that the next huge one was probably Force Unleashed. At least from my perspective being a kid, because that was 2008, I want to say.
Yeah, so that would have been right when I graduated high school. I remember, yeah, Force Unleashed. Yeah, because that was on the PS3 360 era of consoles at that time. Yeah. Force Unleashed was super. I remember actually reading about Force Unleashed in Game Informer before, like a year before it came out, and like some of like how like they went to Lucas or like, hey, we want to do this kind of game, and even I think a deleted scene from Revenge of the Sith was already kind of played into that with Shaak Ti, where there's a deleted scene in Revenge of the Sith where Shaak Ti gets captured, and she gets killed by General Grievous, but then they take out that scene because they're going to reuse Shaak Ti later in the Force Unleashed. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, we get to the Force Unleashed. They have the thing with Starkiller, as most people know, the original name for Luke Skywalker. Thankfully, they realized that wasn't a great name for a protagonist at the time, but we get to Starkiller. I remember playing that game. And I just loved using the Force because I think that was like the first game that really made the Force not like something that was like kind of like pre-scripted. It was kind of like active. You move stuff around. Like you could either blast away stormtroopers or even use them to like whack other stormtroopers with them. Like it was really cool. It was very finicky. It was not refined by any means. It was very finicky, handles really weirdly. I remember looking up YouTube tutorials on how to use the Force properly.
Yeah.
And it was hard to figure it out. I vaguely remember the Force Unleashed too, because I remember after playing the first one, I wasn't too into the idea of like the clone stuff, and I was like, I vaguely remember any of that. Then we got into Renegade Squadron, which you talked about separately on other stuff. I played Renegade Squadron, I think my senior year in high school, because I remember using the school's Wi-Fi to play online. It was really cool.
Yeah.
After Renegade Squadron, I didn't play Elite Squadron. You said you played Elite Squadron. I didn't. I missed that one for some reason. It was not on my radar. And kind of, I think, yeah, we were confused. We were like, where's Star Wars gonna go from here? I remember the books, because there was no plans for sequel books for sequel movies at the time with Han and all them. The books kind of were free to go wherever they wanted. They definitely went into the stuff with the Yuzhan Vong, which I don't know if you ever read. The Yuzhan Vong was kind of like a whole story arc with these even more aliens that came out from the fringes of the universe, and they were somehow impervious to lightsabers. It was a whole big thing when they came out at least in the book world at the time for Star Wars fans. I played a little bit of Star Wars Galaxies. We kind of talked about it before. Galaxies was kind of if you implemented The Sims into Star Wars in a way, because there is combat stuff, but it wasn't as RPG-ish as say the Old Republic MMO is. It was much more social integration, and not social how you think of social media, but social players you play a role in the game and you kind of just live out that role doing stuff. So kind of like Second Life. I don't know if you remember what Second Life is, but it was that with Star Wars. So that closed down. Then before we get to the Disney acquisition era, we got some of the coolest trailers of all time. And you probably know where I'm going with this. The most cinematic, dope-ass, Star Wars trailers were why is this not a movie? And it was those super cinematic trailers for the Old Republic MMO. Yes. Oh my god. Was there anything cooler at that time? I don't think there is. If there is, don't answer if there is, but...
There is not.
Go ahead.
So the trailer I love the most is called Deceived, and it takes place on Alderaan. And I swear to God, I still watch that trailer several times a year. When those first came out, that was a cultural moment. Whenever the new trailer would drop, me and my cousin would just watch that over and over again. But Deceived in particular, God, it still gives me chills because basically the conceit of it is there's a Sith army marching through the Force on Alderaan, and you've got Republic troopers, just a couple of them who are remaining up in the trees. And it's the voiceover of what's his name? I always forget.
It's Thrak, something with a T. I forget.
Yeah, the iconic Republic trooper. He's given this narration, and they jump down to fight the Sith, and it does not go very well. And then, which Sean is that? It's Bastila. Satele Sean, right? Her
in the
Bastila's
books,
ancestor.
Yes. Well,
or not ancestor.
Bastila's descendant.
Yes, descendant, not ancestor. Yeah. And so they fight. It's super badass. And then it ends with this shot of they've defeated the Sith, and it's Satele and the trooper, and they shoot up a flare, and the camera zooms out, and you see more and more flares.
Yes.
And I get chills every time I watch that.
Hype as fuck. Yes.
Yeah, that trailer is so good.
Oh, you give me goosebumps right now. I'm not even watching it, but just remembering, man, that was. Oh, that could have been so much more. I mean, I haven't played. Honestly, I've never played the Old Republic MMO. I'm just not really an MMO guy, but just talking about it is maybe I should, because it's free now. Maybe I should just kind of dip my toes in a little bit.
They still get expansions all the time. A new one just came out this year. I remember, heartbreaking, my parents got it for me for Christmas one year, but my parents knew nothing about it. Was very simple because I had consoles. The box said PS2, worked on the PS2. Box says Wii, works on the Wii, so on and so forth. The box says the Old Republic. Fuck if my parents know if it works on the Mac that they have, and the answer is absolutely not. So I never got to play it. So
did they give it to you, and that's how you found out it didn't work, or?
Yeah, it was one of my Christmas gifts, and I gotta
more heartbreaking.
Try to install it, and you're like, no, what are you trying to do here? It's not gonna work. So. But,
okay, so that soured your impression of the Old Republic. That made you never want to play it again, I guess. But yeah, we got those trailers. I want to say that was 2009. I could be wrong. I think those trailers came out 2009. Not that Deceived one, but the other one before, where they invade. For some reason, they released the trailers out of context, out of timeline context. It's the one that they first showed is actually the last one chronologically. It's weird.
Is that the one where they're invading the temple?
Yes, that's the last one chronologically. Yeah. Because the first one is the one where the Sith just come out of hyperspace above Korriban, and they invade that space station. and then you
Yeah.
have like that dope ass fight between the two Sith and the two Jedi. And then after that is the one you're talking about, Deceived. And then after that one's the one where they finally invade the Jedi Temple like proper.
Yeah.
And so the Jedi that one, the last, I forget what it's called, but that last one is the one we first saw, and I was like, oh, dope, we're getting like another KOTOR because I already played KOTOR 1 and 2 at this point. And then you get the words of like the Old Republic, and then it's like something like online, it's like, oh no, like you see the words
Yeah.
online, and it's just like, oh, it's just crushing, like, oh, probably it's a subscription probably. I don't have a PC. I don't have a gaming PC. I have like this wonky laptop. Like all my gaming is on console, and I was just like soul crushing. I was like, no, and I kind of just forgot about it until like the
Yeah.
last few years. So, but after that, we got at some point we started getting a whole bunch of Clone Wars tie-in games, as in Clone Wars like the show. Like we got Lego Star Wars 3, which I think was all Clone Wars. You're a little more knowledgeable
Yes.
about that, Abrams. I'll let you take it from here.
So, okay. So, really, what I love about this period is there's a lot of experimentation that I want to talk about in more depth. But then there was also the Clone Wars block. And the Clone Wars block, the show started, I believe, in 2008. Ran for a while, ended, came back on Netflix for a 6th season, came back on Disney Plus just last year for a 7th. But that was really Star Wars I grew up on. And because of that, watched it every week on Cartoon Network, had all of the toys, completely obsessed with it. I had Captain Rex's blaster as a Nerf gun, and I just run around my yard because I lived in rural Maine, so I had a huge yard to run around pretending I was shooting battle droids and everything like that. That captured my imagination, but it also captured the financial interests of a lot of publishers and studios who got roped into really bad games from this era. So there was a lot that I played and thought were amazing when I was a kid, but would not hold up at all upon further examination. So there's one on Wii called Star Wars Clone Wars Lightsaber Battles, which was as simple a fighting game as you could have possibly gotten, but you swung the Wii remote around, you got to play as the Clone Wars characters. It looked like the show. Very cool. The one that was hyped up that ended up not delivering was Star Wars, the Clone Wars Republic Heroes, which was like a third-person action game. It was clearly the highest budget project. It was on every conceivable platform. I had it on Wii. The Wii version was not great. I don't know if it was better on 360 because
was that the top down one or no?
No, this was like a proper third-person action game, and it would alternate between like hack and slash sections with Jedi with basic platforming, and then third-person shooting with the clones. And it told a unique story in that chapter of the Star Wars universe. But so then there's other ones on DS and the PSP specifically that I never had and are not worth remembering. There was a glut of Clone Wars content, and it kind of speaks to the fact that I think the Clone Wars was doing a lot of heavy lifting at this period of time. That was where the energy was. We got the film, which was my first theatrical Star Wars experience. It's really inconceivable in hindsight that they made that whole goddamn movie about carrying around Rada the Hutt, and it's just like, but they did that, and then that set up the show, and the show ran every week. And Dave, I think now you grew up with the franchise before I did, so my reverence, and I think my generation's reverence for Dave Filoni came from Clone Wars. I mean, that was really his project, right? And I know he's involved prior, but Dave Filoni became the name that he is now. I think The Mandalorian would not be what The Mandalorian is if not for him cutting his teeth on Clone Wars and bringing new generations in. But that was the lifeblood. I think in hindsight, I've certainly cooled down on the series because I think there's a lot of filler in that show. I think Rebels is the much stronger show. But you'd be remiss to not talk about the Clone Wars to some degree of detail when you're referring to this period of time, because that was the commercial push. That's where most of the content was coming from.
Yeah, I mean, Clone Wars, the series, at that time, I was 18, 19, and I think at that point, like, Clone Wars didn't speak to me as much as someone, say, your age at the time. I would watch it every now and then. I think the only times I really got immersed in Clone Wars is when it was 3 specific storylines. It was when they brought back Darth Maul and that whole
Yes.
thing of him taking over the Black Sun Syndicate and all that stuff with Savage and all that. Like that stuff was cool because I like
Yes.
seeing like Darth Maul as a kid. Darth Maul was the epitome of coolness. Like you have this dude with these face tattoos, double bladed lightsaber, which we had like never seen before. No one before him had a double bladed lightsaber.
Yeah.
He had these horns. He had like this like demonic like look to him. Like Darth Maul was like, man, like that's a badass Sith right there. And to have like Darth Maul come back, which was a really odd choice, but now I think was genius. But at the time was really weird, and it's like they're bringing back Darth Maul. Like, how's that gonna work? Because like Clone Wars takes place between episode 2 and 3,
Yeah.
and 3 is already done. So it's like, where can they go with Darth Maul? Like, oh, he's gonna have to die by the end of Revenge of the Sith or something. Then turns out no, he somehow lived beyond that, and up to A New Hope is like when that actually happens. But that storyline, the one with I forget what it's called. It's like a 5-part episode series where it's just like this really long ass drawn out battle.
Was it the one on? Was it with the 4-armed Jedi
Yes,
commander?
I
Yes.
forget his name. The one that betrays them.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I forget his name too, but that's the Umbara saga. That because that is
Okay.
that's deep into the show. That's phase 2 clones. That's where.
Yeah.
You keep talking. I'm gonna look up this guy's name.
No, it's fine. Yeah, he looks just he's like the same species as Dex is from Attack of the Clones, like one who gives like Obi-Wan like he has like the forearms. It's like Paul Krell, something like that. I can't remember his name exactly. It's like Krell something. But anyways, he's giving these bad orders, like even the clones under him are kind of like yo, like you like suck at this. Like you're clearly like it's almost like you're not being negligent. You're actually like trying to harm us actively. And then they realize they put two and together. And then they have like that really badass battle where they try to subdue him. They know they can't kill him, but they try to subdue him. Eventually, they are able to pull it off. That one was really cool because I like how they're like at least one of the Jedi is already aware of like what the strings pulling in the background. Like, because one of the things that infuriates me is how blind the Jedi are throughout the entire prequel trilogy. Where it's how do you not? And like we get the throwaway line from Yoda. Oh, the dark side, like hard to see it is, and it's like, okay, it's like this guy's been Chancellor for I don't know how many terms, and you guys are kind of still just rolling with it, and it's just like why are you guys so inept at this? It's like there's a whole bunch of you. Like, anyways, I'm just gonna. That's one of the storylines I really enjoyed. And then the last one is the Mortis arc, of course, with the father, the daughter, and the son, all that stuff. Because that stuff is like anytime we ever like touch upon the nature or the spirituality of the Force, like I am zoned in because that's the stuff that kind of speaks to me as I've gotten older. Like I love this idea of like the as Yoda calls it the net that kind of all living things created. It's kind of like this invisible net thing that connects everything. Like I love that really dope kind of pseudo stand-in for religion in a way. And we talked about this of course before we started recording, but seeing the nature of the Force not just from a Sith point or a Jedi point, but like from the Night Sisters, where it's like the Force is whatever the society or the group needs it to be. And I love getting into that stuff. And we get the foreshadowing of like the Anakin's path, and then the convenient plot point of a mind wipe and all that stuff. But like those are the 3 things from Clone Wars that actually I actually really enjoy. And then that one episode where Jar Jar's not completely useless and actually saves the day. I know what I'm talking about.
Well, what's funny is Jar Jar is actually a very consistent character as not only consistent but competent in the Clone Wars, and I think that show has a lot of filler and a lot of filler. And because of that, I think it's shaky on the whole, but I think it is also emblematic of what was fun about this period of Star Wars is that there was a lot of room to experiment and flesh things out. So, you got to see Jar Jar do things and not just be a bumbling CGI idiot because George Lucas wanted a CGI character and comedic relief and Phantom Menace, right? You got to actually flesh him out and make him somebody valuable to the Star Wars universe. And I think it's because of the Clone Wars that I don't hate Jar Jar. I think Jar Jar is a fun character, but it took time, right? And I think what we had in this period of post Revenge of the Sith, pre-Disney era, was time to explore. And so I think this was telegraphed super early on in the Clone Wars, actually probably with the premiere. And if I remember correctly, the show premiered at 9 p.m. on Cartoon Network. I was 7
Yeah.
at the time. The reason I remember this detail so acutely is because I had to negotiate to be up for that for 9 o'clock, because that was critically late at this point in my life. My parents were like, "Well, you're gonna stay up until 9:30 watching this show?" I don't know about that, but I was able to I was able to work my way into it. I think I was certainly insufferable as a child at this point in my life. I distinctly remember, and my parents loved me too much. They left dinner with their friends to make sure I was back in time to watch a Clone Wars
I
episode.
remember this story. Yeah, I already told me this. Like, go
And
ahead.
so, like, but in that first episode, in that premiere, it's Yoda and the Toydarians on Toydaria, and the droids are coming to invade, and it's about Yoda and the Toydarians, who we don't care about. In fact, our only touchdown for them is Watto, right? And it kind of recontextualizes what those characters mean, how Yoda uses the Force, and how they overcome these odds. And at its best, the Clone Wars did that, and I think on a more macro level, this period of time of Star Wars did that too. You talk about things like the Force Unleashed, which coincidentally the only other episode of my Star Wars show is about the Force Unleashed. But beyond the context of the game mechanically, which I think has definitely not aged especially well, the fact that they were able to explore this period of time in the Star Wars universe so flexibly is really great. Being Vader's apprentice, in some aspects, some of this content was sort of small universe syndrome, but a lot of it was super expansive. You talk about all these new ideas with the EU getting to take Han, Luke, and Leia wherever, where now Disney era Star Wars, like, no, we got to be very deliberate about all of this. And even the stuff that expands that I love, like, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, it slots very nicely into the timeline. There's a lot of stuff here that is messy and goes in different directions and tells fun stories. And the Clone Wars did a lot of that.
No, yeah, I agree. Some of my favorite stuff from I know I only mentioned three things, but there's another thing I do love, and it's the thing that most Star Wars fans absolutely hate, but I love from a history standpoint is I actually do like the politics in Star Wars. And I know
Yeah.
it sounds like weird because a lot of people do. They feel like it kind of like slows the momentum and stuff. But the politics in Star Wars is what makes it feel real to me. It's what makes it feel like lived in, like actual like stakes. It's not just like, bad guy, here are the good guys. You know what I mean? There's actual like legal steps you have to take to like creating a clone army. We don't have a standing army. Well, we have to like legally create one. And it's like, well, how do we do that legally? And it's not just kind of things that are explained away. Like you have to manage and kind of tiptoe across these
Yeah.
like rules in society. And that's what I love about there's one episode I love where you probably know this better than I do, but there's one where Padme actually goes to visit the Confederation, the independent
Yes.
system, the CIS, where they
Yes.
have their own kind of like Senate, their own style of the Senate. They kind of like splintered off, and then you can see the politics and like the aggression of the Republic from their point of view, and it's like, oh shoot, like this isn't as black and white as it we've been presented through the movies that it is. Like not everybody in the Confederacy is just like the Trade Federation or like Count Dooku or just like ruthless. It's like there is real people in these independent systems who have been neglected by the Republic and stuff. So it's like, and when you have no like representation and stuff, then you're forced to kind of go outside extra legal means and like that stuff. Like I know there's so many things I love about Star Wars, but that kind of extra exposition to kind of like I remember one of the most funny lines from one of the opening crawls from Revenge of the Sith is like there's heroes and villains on both sides. That's like one of the first like the
Yeah.
first sentence of the opening crawl, and it's like what? Like no, clearly there's heroes and then there's villains. Like there's no like, but like that episode that I saw with Padme and she kind of gets to know like the Confederacy and like they kind of have like a kind of like a political debate and stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's like oh shoot, like yeah, we've always seen things from the lens of like the light side and the good side, but it's like it's like the real world. Things aren't just black and white. There is shades of gray in between. So for the most part, you say it's filler. And I think this is just maybe one, it might be two episodes, but I think it's like a one episode story. I don't remember exactly, but that was not like filler in the traditional sense for me. That was like
Yeah.
actually like expanded the the in universe, like political machinations to me. And I love that stuff. So
It's so, I very distinctly remember what you're talking about, because this was the part of Star Wars where, as a kid, I did not care at all about. And I remember it's funny because Dave Filoni knew this. There is a quite famous quote that I would have fallen in love with this quote if I was older and a little bit more cognizant, critical of just the content I was consuming. But he gave a quote. He's like, "Yeah," because this is at the beginning of season two, and it actually went for several episodes. Padme and Jar Jar's exploits together went for several episodes, and and then it leads into this arc on Geonosis, where there's a droid factory that becomes like that they have to it becomes a humongous threat. Maybe they're manufacturing like commando droids or something. I forget exactly what it is, but they have to shut down this factory in particular. So they're actually just doing another siege of Geonosis, and it begins with this episode. This is the episode that I remember the best from the entire series because I had it on my iPod. I had an iPod Nano with the screen and a couple episodes of Star Wars. Whenever I miss an episode of the show, and it was gonna fucking hell to pay in the Beaner household. So my parents would get it off iTunes and I'd watch it that way. Lenny at Point Rain was one of those. Lenny at Point Rain is the antithesis of what you just said. It is 22 minutes of only action, of killing droids, killing Geonosians, ships crashing, people being separated, coming back together. And Dave Filoni says something to the effect of, everybody has been waiting for something, for action. We know that there's been too much politics. We landing at Point Rain had to be a moment of catharsis for everybody, and it was. And for me as a kid, I was like, "Yep, baby, we're right back into it." But I'm sure actually, if I were to revisit the show, I would still love Lenny at Point Rain because it's still cool action. But it is that politics that makes Star Wars so interesting. What I've always said about the prequels is that what I think about George Lucas on the highest level is that he is a genius and he is a creative on a level that almost nobody else is. But by the time he got to the prequels, he had everything at his disposal. Monetarily, technically, he could do whatever he wanted, and because of that,
no one dared to say no.
Yes, and because of that, I think we got the weakest movies, but the most interesting period of Star Wars. The prequels are so rich with ideas of themes and political, because there's a lot of political messaging in the original trilogy that was a lot more focused because those films are more focused. There's still a lot of that in the prequels, but it got lost because we were on to the next thing. We were on to Naboo so we can float the pear and do all of this stuff that's notorious that just
Float the pear.
It just completely overwhelms the good stuff, the interesting stuff that you're talking about, these ideas of representation and politicking in this galaxy being, we're in the United States, we're one country and the politics are a disaster. Now extrapolate that out to the world, extrapolate the world out to a galaxy.
Thousands of systems,
systems all over the place. And we establish that in the prequel movies, but we don't do anything with it. And it's through the books, it's through the Clone Wars, through all of this stuff in the interim period that we actually get to slow down and take some time with these ideas.
No, yeah, I think you're right, Abram. Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. Star Wars, for me, I know it's for people, it's a lot of different things, but I know I keep beating the same thing over the head of the head. And I'm a history major. I minored in government, and so like for me, like it's funny growing up like in high school and college. Whenever I would have an essay or anything that I had to write anything, I would always try to relate it to Star Wars in some fashion. Whether it was about the U.S. Civil War, I'm like, it's just like in Star Wars with the Confederacy and the Republic, and like whenever I had to talk about like government, it's like just in Star Wars where like emergency powers and not, but it's like, it really is like growing up with Star Wars, like there is so many parallels to real life, like history and just things about like, it teaches you like focus, teaches you about not taking the easy way out, right? Like Luke asks Obi-Wan, like, is the dark side stronger? He's like, no, like quicker, like faster, and easier, but it's not like stronger. Like anger or whatever is like a motivation to get you to the things you want, but it's not the cleanest path. And I realize I'm kind of going off topic now. I'm trying to keep it to between this time period. But yeah, you're right. The movies are the prequels are messy, and when you're a kid, like when I was watching them as a kid, I was just like, like lightsabers go brrr, like you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
that's but so in this period between between the Disney acquisition and post Revenge of the Sith, trying to figure out where is the trajectory for Star Wars. And I remember, just like you've mentioned this in your piece, I remember the rumors of a Battlefront 3 like swirling around, like
Yeah.
here's concept art of like a dark Obi-Wan and like stuff like that, and just like where are we gonna go with this? And I think the last thing before the Disney acquisition, the last thing I remember Star Wars related was like, there's not going to be a KOTOR 3. If you want KOTOR 3, get the Old Republic MMO. And
Yeah.
that was like the last Star Wars related thing, I think. That was like the last new thing. That was like 2009 ish. And then what? Disney acquired them like what, 2011, 2010, around there?
I want to say it's 2012, but I could be wrong about that. But haggling dates aside, I'll check this out while you answer this, because I think there's two major things we have to talk about, and
Okay.
still, and they revolve around the acquisition and what happens in the aftermath of it.
Okay.
But so, were there rumors to the effect of this acquisition happening, and what was that reaction like when it happened? Because again, it did not track on my radar, that it got acquired, that anything was
A
different.
decade ago, yeah.
It like, as a kid at that point in time, it didn't really matter to me who owned Star Wars. I don't know who owns Star Wars. I own a copy of Battlefront 2. That's as far as my understanding of owning things went. So what was that like?
From what I remember, because we know, okay, at this point, Disney, I believe, had already acquired Marvel. I'm at right around this point, I think they've already acquired Marvel, because I think starting with right after Iron Man 2, from then on, it was like a Disney joint like production or whatever. So that was what, 2011, I want to say. So yeah, that sounds about right. And then, yeah, because Avengers was 2013. So Iron
Okay.
Man 2, and we still. What?
I just checked the dates on this.
Okay.
2009 was the acquisition of Marvel. 2012
Okay.
was the acquisition of Star Wars.
Okay, so 2012. You're right. Yeah, I remember hearing rumors and stuff like this, because I wasn't on Twitter. I wasn't into like following up the same stuff like I am now. I wasn't into like fully immersed in terms of like the news side. I was into like the comics and books and stuff, but I wasn't into like the news side of stuff. But I remember hearing that they were. I think it was like on my parents were watching Fox one evening, and I remember on the news hearing like, oh, like they're closing negotiations, or they're closing like a room, or like word is like they're like trying to like. I guess they were still probably like arguing over the figures, like number monetarily, but they're like, oh, like the Disney's closing in on purchasing Lucasfilm and its properties, so Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and all that. And my immediate reaction was like, oh no, at the time, because I was like, I mean, like Disney has, I'll give them credit, like they have done terrific with Marvel, but like at the time when you think Disney, like Abram, if I tell you Disney, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear Disney?
Winnie the Pooh.
Okay,
That's my answer. On a broader level, I think, because Disney next to Star Wars was so important to my childhood, and so it kind of became a marriage of the brands that almost helped raise me in Disney and Star Wars. But when I think of Disney, I think of family. This is the family brand. The main vertical of Disney is the animated films. It skews young towards children with your Mickey Mouses. I watched a lot of Mickey Mouse Clubhouse as a kid. That's the sort of content that I connotated Disney with at the time.
So part of my reaction was, oh no, because I was thinking like, oh, are we gonna get like Pixar like Star Wars movies? Like, are we gonna get like Pixar style cartoons? And then like shortly after that, I was like, oh, like someone who can actually do something with the franchise, unlike George Lucas, who's been kind of just like sitting on it. Because I was like, this actually makes sense, because growing up in Kirin, California, like before the acquisition, like there's a Star Tours ride at Disneyland, and on the weekends, even before the acquisition, they would do kind of like a Star Wars day kind of thing sometimes. Like even before the acquisition, there was like, because like ties between there's like I remember seeing like Mickey in like a Jedi robe and stuff. Like there's
Yeah.
been like they've always had like close relations between the two like entities and stuff. So part of it was oh no, and then it quickly became like we'll hold and see. And then I remember as we started hearing about like the Force Awakens, it became like oh yes, like it was like okay like Star Wars is back, baby. Like
Yeah.
we're doing this. It's like what they're bringing back Han and Luke and Leia. Like what? Like okay, because when they acquired it, I think they immediately said they were gonna do sequels to the original trilogy. I think. But I
Yeah.
remember there was like a period where we were kind of like, what does this mean? And then immediately after, like, oh yeah, we're gonna do sequels and we're bringing back Han. There's like that infamous shot of them like they're all reading the scripts in like that black and white photo. You've probably seen it at this point a couple times. And I remember seeing that photo where they're all in the room with the scripts, and I'm just like, I saw that and I felt like emotional almost. Everyone was like, oh my god, like that's like it's not just because you hear about news and you're like, okay, sure, I'll see it when I believe it. But seeing that photo of all of these characters, Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and like all of them in the room with scripts with the new characters, like oh, this is real. Like this isn't like
Yeah.
it's I can see it. It's tangible, like in front of me in a way. And I just remember being like thank you, like we're gonna get more Star Wars. Like whether it's good or bad, I don't know, but I do know it's Star Wars, and that's like somewhere to begin with. So I remember, yeah, I thought I mostly had a negative, and then quickly spiraled around to positive reaction when I heard that news. Um, what was your second question? I forgot.
I think that was both of them. I think
Oh,
you
okay.
answered that. I was kind of curious about the like the run up and then the actual event. So because again, for me, it didn't really track. I think what tracked more was kind of that quiet period because there still was a fair amount of activity, and then there was like that couple of years where, especially on the video game front, there was basically nothing. There's basically
Right.
nothing until 2015 when we got we got Disney Infinity 3.0, Lego Star Wars Force Unleashed, and of course Star Wars Battlefront, all kind of in that. Actually, I think no, like the Star Wars might have been 2016, but we definitely had definitely had Disney Infinity and Battlefront that year. Battlefront actually is what made me buy a PS4, and
Hmm.
I'll
Okay.
defend that game forever. I actually think it's quite fun in certain contexts. I think it'd be fun to actually just talk about Battlefront as a franchise one of these episodes. But yeah, again, for me, it didn't really matter. It didn't matter at all until we saw that trailer. Of course, with the Chewie "We're home" line and everything. When Force Awakens was now Force Awakens, and it was the new Star Wars movie, and that's on the horizon, that's tangible, and that was a moment of great excitement. And I think that we ought to save that for a conversation about Disney Star Wars because that was a real triumphant beginning to what became kind of a complicated mess. And I think one of the last things to mention here in the purview of this discussion is I want to do a little bit of a show and tell. We're gonna play a quick game of spot the difference, and I want you to then you're gonna see you're gonna see the difference immediately, and then I want you to tell me about it. This is Star Wars. My lamp's fucking up. Doesn't matter. Star Wars Alphabet Squadron.
I see. Yeah.
Star Wars The Old Republic.
The Legends banner.
Light of Jedi. Heir to the Empire. What do these two books have that these two books do not have?
The two books, the newer ones don't require the Legends banner.
Yes, so I think we ought to mention this before we end the episode because in the light of all of this excitement, this new era of Star Wars, we got Legends. And for those who aren't familiar, Legends is essentially Disney said, clear the canon, we're starting again. In effect, they picked and chose what was going to remain canon, but basically, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think pretty much all of the books became Legends storytelling. No longer canon, still sold, still resold under this new branding, but the very lifeblood of this period of Star Wars we've been discussing, the novels, things like The Force Unleashed, all of that in an instant was made no longer canon. And I think part of why Star Wars stayed so vibrant during this time is because these stories held weight. They mattered. And then overnight, Alphabet Squadron mattered, but perhaps arguably the most famous expanded universe story. Heir to the Empire
Yeah.
didn't. So what did that
Yeah.
what did that mean to you?
Yeah. Now I remember why I had a negative reaction. I was like something negative, and I just completely just missed it. It went over my head until right now when you brought the legend. I'm like, that's what it was. Is for so long. I actually have, I don't know where it is. I have the last actual like chronologically released EU book. I think it's called Aftermath. It's like the last of the original expanded universe, and then I think that was the last book that came out from the old canon, and then I think like 2 months later we got like the first one, the first of the new like there was a clear line of where this is the old stuff that's going away, and then like here's the new stuff. Like, I remember there was a clear line of when that happened, and for a long time the EU did pretty much all the heavy lifting for Star Wars. After the movies, there was nothing really, like there was no content unless it was the EU content. That's where we got some of the best ideas for Star Wars come from the EU. Thrawn, Coruscant, as I mentioned before, Coruscant first appears in Heir to the Empire. That's the first mention of the planet. That's the first like the description of a sprawling city, the Jedi Temple. All that stuff shows up in Heir to the Empire first. And I just remember kind of I felt, and I know it's hyperbolic to say, but it was almost kind of like a sense of like lost investment in a way, because like while the books were never going to be like the movies, they were never going to be the movies or any continuation of the movies. There was never going to be movies of the books of the expanded universe, but in the head canon for a lot of like the older fans, like I've people who I through Facebook and other social media who like, it's like, you remember like these EU stories and like, oh yeah, we love like the Yuzan Vong, we love like Legacy of the Force. Some of the stuff that's like years in the future, if you're in the comics, which I did actually, these comics I did read. I don't know if you ever, I think we actually showed you in the Discord once, I forgot who the other person was,
Oh,
but
Seth.
Seth, okay, it was the legacy comics where it's like where Luke is now like a Force ghost and he's like mentoring like his great descendant and stuff, and like it's like really good, like rich storytelling. It's like great
Yeah.
stuff, and it's like that stuff is like it's being wiped out, and it was kind of like well, that sucks. But at the same time, we understood why it had to be wiped out, because the books had never they had never been completely organized by any means of the
Yeah.
word. Like it wasn't until Pablo Hidalgo came and he started doing like the lore master and like crafting, making sure nothing contradicts itself in any way. Because in the old EU, there were kind of a couple of things where like, okay, is this character like not related to this character, but this author says they are related, and it was kind of like a few things, especially like timeline wise, where like one of the old EU characters, Kip Durin, he was like a dark Jedi turned proper Jedi. He gets his hands on something called the Sun Crusher, which is like another Death Star weapon. And it's like, wait, did this happen before that book or after that book? And because back in the early EU, a lot of the authors like Del Rey, or the publishing companies Del Rey, and I forget what there was one other one that worked directly with Lucasfilm at the time. They were just like kind of signing off, like, yeah, well, signing off checks, and like, yeah, collecting royalties, and like, oh yeah, you can do this story. But nobody was really curating the timeline early on in terms of like what happens in what event. And so like if you try to, a lot of the EU books actually have like, if you open the first page, there is like now an actual timeline like
Yeah.
of what happened now, and like it's been fixed retroactively. They've even introduced books in the under the Legends banner which fix some of the older stuff. Like there's a book called Outbound Flight. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it kind of fixes Thrawn's origin, because later on in Heir to the Empire, some things about Thrawn's nature are kind of murky. And so Outbound Flight kind of introduces like it's like the first chronological introduction of Thrawn. And anyways, it happens with Anakin and Obi-Wan and some other stuff in there. But yeah, the loss of the EU under Legends was kind of like thanks for supporting the license of it to this point, but we're gonna take it from here now. And it was devastating. I know it sounds hyperbolic, but for me as a longtime like Star Wars fan, it was devastating. I was thinking like, why don't you guys just continue like just treat it like how comics do, where you have like the regular universe and there's like an ultimate universe or an alternate, like just do that. But I guess it's, I don't know, too messy, or they just didn't want to devote like resources to stuff that's not important to the new stuff, I guess. I would preferred, hey, okay, create your new canon, but have allow a few authors to carry on like the old legacy, and like just just push it in the corner, and like the old time fans will still have that to latch onto. It's kind of like, if you know, Final Fantasy 14 online is the big thing right now, but there's also Final Fantasy 11 online, the original MMO. That one's still up and getting new content. I don't know if you know that.
Hmm.
They're still getting new. Yeah, you just got a story expansion like a month ago, and so there's people who are playing, who are still supporting Final Fantasy 11 like 20 years later, but they're still, the focus is on 14, of course. That's the big one. So I feel like they could have just done that with the books, where like the legends kind of like tuck it away into a corner. Fine, if you don't want to acknowledge it, then just leave it. Like, let some people, like, we don't want to promote it, let some authors like contribute to it or whatever, and then focus your sources on the new stuff. But it is what it is. I was bummed. To me, like, at the same time, those stories are not going anywhere. Like, they still live on. It sounds like I'm talking about like some kind of tradition or something that's been passed on for years, but like those stories still live on. I still have memories. I was just rereading one of my favorite books from that era. It was one of the old like Lando Calrissian stories, like from like the 80s, like old early EU. I was rereading like the Lando Calrissian Adventures, which he actually references in Solo in the movie. Like he talks about, like, he does like those journals, the logging stuff.
Yeah.
Like one of the titles of the actual books is one of the ones he mentions in the. So like I was like, oh, like okay, I appreciate that nod in the wink. So, but I think I answered your question, Abram. I hope. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect, and I don't think you're being hyperbolic when you talk about it being a devastating loss, because it was probably, I can imagine how, in the eyes of Disney, it was a necessary loss, right?
Yeah.
That they had to do that, but at the same time, it from the perspective of the fans, it was a big detriment, because throughout this entire period that we're talking about, there was new Star Wars content coming, and it was experimental and it was peculiar, whether we're talking about the books or the games with these various offshoots we took. But this was an era of Star Wars that was driven by the fans, driven by things like Star Wars Celebration and these huge 501st Legion meetups where everybody's in their clone armor. And it was a period where the community was carrying the brand. And it was the imagination that we projected into these EU books. Even myself, not being a huge reader, I was reading the young adult books with Qui-Gon and Anakin and Obi-Wan, and these stories they're going on, right? These helped
teenage Anakin.
Yeah, they helped propel the franchise forward when it was in this kind of stasis moment between Lucas and Disney, and then that was all just sucked away in a moment. And I think they're trying to do right, and they blatantly just taking elements of the EU and reintroducing them. Like, I'm pretty sure Boba Fett getting out of the Sarlacc pit is an EU concept, and
yes it is.
I would not be surprised if we end up getting a very similar escape from the Sarlacc pit in Book of Boba Fett and through a flashback, as we got in the EU storytelling before. But it was just a big loss. But I think the fact that, for me personally, of course, I was not as invested in it in terms of the books, but I was in terms of the games. To me, Force Unleashed, that happened. That is part of the Star Wars timeline, right? But it goes back again to this concept that I personally will end my piece on, of Star Wars is about the fans, and it's about what we project into it and how our imagination expands it. And so I can play KOTOR in 2021 and say, this is part of my Star Wars, right? And then you can recommend me this book right here, and to me, this is canon. Disney can say whatever the hell they want. Frankly, I don't care. Star Wars transcends that, and it always will be, for me, a transcendent franchise that this intersection of topics that we wrestle with in our own lives about relationships and spirituality and all of this, and it's at the nexus of personal experience and imaginative play and all of this, and no box that Star Wars is put in is ever going to contain that, right? And so this was a period of Star Wars where it really couldn't be contained. There was no Phantom Menace 3D, Clone Wars movie. There was no major film to rally around, but it didn't matter. Star Wars didn't go anywhere. That era bred me. That's what I became a Star Wars fan in that period of time, because that enthusiasm persisted. Star Wars Insider, Clone Wars, Force Unleashed, the books, all of it. It kept moving. And I just think that's something that's really cool. And the loss of the EU is never really going to be gone. And I think the fact that Disney reintegrates those concepts and re-releases these books is a testament to that the fans at the end of the day, we matter to what Star Wars is, and that's not going to go away.
You're right. I remember there's this great quote. I can't remember which author it was, but he said they said that it's like George Lucas created like Star Wars, but really like he created this universe as like a sandbox for other people to kind of dip their toes in and play with, like shape the other corners of the galaxy for to their liking and stuff. So like he's the originator, but like really it's like even before he sold it to Disney, it like kind of in a way no longer belonged to him because it was like up for use for like other people to kind of just like carve out their own parts of the sandbox, so to speak. So yeah, you're right. It is definitely for in some aspects like by the fans.
Yeah. Andrew, anything else you want to add to this discussion about this period of time?
I have a question, but I'm not sure if it's for now or should I save it for a future episode.
Ask it. Maybe we leave it as a cliffhanger
right.
if it's too big, but I'd love to hear it.
Okay. As somebody who knew who Darth Vader was before I even saw The Phantom Menace, do you remember the point where you realized that Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker were one and the same? Do you remember that happening, or was it just something that you always just knew just because?
See, this is very interesting that you bring this up, because my very earliest understanding of Star Wars is that, I don't know if this belonged to somebody in my family or whatever, but I had a Kenner Darth Vader figure. Wow. From the very beginning, I still have a Tonka Millennium Falcon and a bunch of Kenner Power of the Force Star Wars toys. We're gonna do a whole episode about Star Wars toys, by the way. So
might be worth
something. That more there. Worth more to me than whoever's gonna buy it off of me. But that's not going anywhere. But okay. I like Darth Vader was just somebody I knew and I understood as a character before I even really understood the larger saga, because of that toy, and then just because of being introduced in, you know, the prequels and then into the original trilogy, because I saw them kind of interchangeably. I think I probably saw Phantom Menace, but then my parents bought me the box set. This is a very distinct day. I always remember my dad bought me the box set of the original trilogy and the Ratatouille game on PS2, because we watched the Ratatouille movie that day. And I
remember that game.
And so, like, my understanding of that twist was so non-linear, because I knew about the character, then I started the prequels, and then I saw the original trilogy, and then I got Revenge of the Sith when that finally released on DVD. I got it for, I guess like around Easter, I remember. It was like maybe in my Easter basket. But so that twist held basically no weight for me. I think I was also probably too young for that to really matter. But the reason I think this is so interesting to bring it up is because my girlfriend is not a Star Wars fan at all. Not because she dislikes it, but because she just didn't grow up with it. And so we made a deal. I grew up loving the Harry Potter books, but never saw the movies. We made this deal where she was going to show me the Harry Potter movies. I was going to show her the Star Wars saga. And we were going to go back and forth. One Harry Potter movie, one Star Wars movie, back and forth. And so and this was just, you know, we just actually completed this at the, this is not a new thought, but post-pandemic, time no longer begins and ends. So sometime in my recent consciousness, we finished this marathon. But so she knew about the twist, but knew nothing about the Star Wars films, you know? So I just think that it has become so culturally ubiquitous that I'm not sure anybody is ever going to get to experience that twist again.
Like purely, you're right. Like, I always ask people who are younger, like in your age bracket or like even younger, I'm like, who are Star Wars fans, like can you tell me like how that was to find out? And like, oh, like I always kind of knew, and I'm like, oh man, really? So your response is pretty much what I usually get. I was hoping like there's got to be someone out there where that twist is actually a twist for them. So
no, not yet. But I will say, the KOTOR twist, which I will not spoil here, was not spoiled for me. So that was
one of I forget if it was Game Informer or Edge. I forgot which one of those gaming magazines that was like top 2 biggest like plot twists in the game, and I was like, yes, it is. So glad you enjoyed that.
I definitely did. But Andrew, I think that went quite well. I have to say, I think that our conversation that actually got recorded was a little bit more focused and stronger than what we were talking about before.
You were right. Narrowing it down definitely helped to streamline it. You're right.
Yeah, and so, like we said, this is going to be bi-weekly. When you all are watching this, it will be fucking carry the one. It'll be the 11th, I believe, next Saturday. Because we're recording on a Sunday.
Oh
They
yeah, you're
post
right.
on the next Saturday. So they'll go up on the 11th. And then there'll be the next episode. We're going to have an episode, and then you're going to get right away a bonus episode for the premiere of Book of Boba Fett. So keep your eye out for 3 more videos for this series in this month. But by and large, get used to 2 episodes of my Star Wars show each month. Not enough, but it just makes you want it a little bit more. Anything else you want to add, Andrew?
Cliche sign off, but may the force be with you.